I stood on my father's pristine doorstep holding my homemade pumpkin bread with trembling hands. 8-year-old Marcus clutched my left arm while 6-year-old Emma pressed against my right leg, both dressed in their cleanest thrift store outfits. When Dad opened the mahogany door, his eyes swept over us with undisguised disgust. His perfectly pressed polo shirt and khakis screamed country club elegance, making our modest appearance seem even shabbier by comparison. "This was meant to be a nice day," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Why did you come?" The words hit me like physical blows. Marcus looked up at me, his innocent brown eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "Mom, should we leave?" My heart shattered completely. "Yes, sweetheart, right now." Walking back to my dented Honda Civic, I fought to keep my composure while the children buckled themselves into their booster seats. The weight of our situation crashed over me like a tsunami of shame and regret. Just 2 years ago, my life had been completely different. I lived in a sprawling colonial mansion with manicured gardens, drove a brand new BMW, and attended charity galas wearing designer gowns that cost more than my current monthly rent. My ex-husband David had been the golden child in my father's eyes, a successful corporate lawyer with a corner office downtown. David earned more in a month than most people saw in a year. Gerald would beam whenever David spoke about his latest case victories, nodding approvingly at discussions of stock portfolios and real estate investments. During family gatherings, they would retreat to Dad's study, smoking expensive cigars while discussing business strategies and golf handicaps. "Your husband really knows how to provide for his family," Dad would tell me proudly, as if David's success somehow reflected his own parenting skills. "You're lucky to have found such an accomplished man." The divorce had been a nightmare beyond anything I could have imagined. David's infidelity with his 24-year-old paralegal wasn't even the worst part. When I discovered their affair, he showed no remorse, no shame. Instead, he coldly informed me that he wanted a divorce and intended to marry Stephanie as soon as the paperwork was finalized. "You've gotten comfortable and boring, Carlie," he had said, not even bothering to look up from his laptop. "Stephanie understands what I need from a woman." The legal proceedings that followed were ruthless. David used every trick in his professional playbook to hide assets claiming his income had mysteriously decreased just months before our separation. Bank accounts that once held hundreds of thousands of dollars suddenly showed minimal balances. His expensive art collection disappeared into storage facilities I couldn't locate. Even the vacation home in Aspen somehow transferred ownership to a shell company days before I filed for divorce. My father's reaction to the divorce had cut deeper than David's betrayal. Instead of offering comfort or support, Gerald blamed me entirely for the marriage's failure. Good men don't cheat unless they're not getting what they need at home. He had lectured me during one particularly painful phone conversation. "You should have worked harder to keep him happy. Now look what you've done to those children." The settlement left me with almost nothing. Our marital home went to David, along with most of our joint assets. I received minimal alimony for just 18 months, and child support barely covered basic necessities. With no recent work experience and only a bachelor's degree in English literature, finding employment that could support 2 children proved nearly impossible. I now work 2 jobs just to keep our small 2-bedroom apartment. Every morning at 5 o'clock, I started my shift at Danny's Diner, serving coffee and eggs to construction workers and early commuters. The work was physically demanding and the tips were modest, but the morning regulars treated me with more respect than I'd received from my own family. My second job cleaning office buildings downtown began at 6 in the evening and lasted until midnight. Pushing a cart full of cleaning supplies through empty corridors, vacuuming conference rooms where important business decisions were made, I often thought about how I used to attend meetings in similar boardrooms as David's wife, offering opinions that people pretended to value. As I started the car's engine, Marcus broke the heavy silence that had settled over us. "Mom, why doesn't Grandpa Gerald like us anymore?" His small voice carried a confusion that pierced my heart. Before I could formulate an answer that wouldn't further damage their relationship with their grandfather, Marcus continued with devastating innocence. Yesterday, when we were at Dad's apartment, I heard Grandpa Gerald talking on the phone. He told someone, "I told Carlie not to come, but she never listens. I can't have my business partners seeing her looking like white trash." The words hit me like a physical blow. My own father had not only rejected us deliberately, but he had also discussed his shame about us with others. The humiliation wasn't spontaneous disappointment, it was calculated cruelty designed to exclude us from the family gathering entirely. Emma, who had been quietly clutching her stuffed rabbit, looked up with tears in her bright blue eyes. "What's white trash, Mommy? Are we bad people?" I pulled over at the first parking lot I could find, my hands shaking too violently to drive safely. The question hung in the air like poison, and I struggled to find words that could counteract the damage my father's prejudice had inflicted on my innocent children. McDonald's wasn't exactly the Thanksgiving brunch I had envisioned, but the children's faces lit up when I suggested we create our own celebration. We found a corner booth decorated with autumn leaves, and I watched Marcus and Emma attack their happy meals with the resilience that continuously amazed me about children. "This is actually better than Grandpa's house," Emma announced, dipping her chicken nugget in ketchup. "They have a playground here." While the children explored the indoor climbing structure, I called my younger sister Jenny. She had declined Gerald's invitation weeks ago, claiming she needed to finish a commissioned painting, but I suspected she was avoiding the family tension surrounding my situation. "I'm so sorry, Carlie," Jenny said immediately after I described the morning's events. "I should have warned you, but I hoped Dad might actually behave like a human being for once." Jenny worked as a freelance artist painting portraits and murals for local businesses. Her income was inconsistent, but she managed to support herself in a small studio apartment across town. Our father had never approved of her career choice, either frequently suggesting she should find a real job or marry someone who could provide stability. "It's worse than you know," Jenny continued, her voice heavy with reluctance. "Dad's been poisoning the family against you for months. He tells anyone who'll listen that you're dragging down the family reputation with your financial problems." The revelation felt like discovering additional layers of betrayal I hadn't even suspected existed. "Aunt Linda asked me last week if it was true that you were working as a cleaning lady. When I confirmed it, she actually wrinkled her nose like she smelled something unpleasant. Cousin Robert's wife made some comment about how embarrassing it must be for the family." Each piece of information felt like another weight added to my chest, making it difficult to breathe properly. "There's something else," Jenny said carefully. "Patricia's been encouraging all of this. She keeps telling Dad that you're a bad influence on the grandchildren, that you're teaching them to expect handouts instead of working hard. She suggested that maybe it would be better if David got full custody. Patricia, my stepmother, had married my father 5 years earlier, shortly after my mother's death from cancer. She was 15 years younger than Gerald, with platinum blonde hair and a wardrobe that cost more than my annual salary. From the beginning, she had treated Jenny and me like obstacles to her perfect new life, but I hadn't realized how actively she was working against me. "I think she sees you as competition for Dad's inheritance," Jenny added quietly. "If she can convince him you're worthless, maybe she thinks he'll write you out of his will entirely." The conversation was interrupted by excited voices from the table next to ours. 2 women in business suits were discussing legal matters over their lunch, and certain phrases caught my attention like alarm bells. "The class action suit is gaining momentum," one woman was saying. Apparently, the law firm was systematically helping wealthy husbands hide assets during divorce proceedings. Women are coming forward with similar stories of suddenly disappearing bank accounts and mysteriously transferred properties. My heart began racing as I heard the name of David's law firm mentioned specifically. "My cousin went through something similar," the second woman replied. "Her husband claimed he was broke while living in a penthouse and driving a Porsche. Turns out he'd been moving money offshore for months before filing for divorce." I strained to hear more details while keeping my expression neutral. The women discussed how difficult it was to prove asset hiding without access to financial records, and how many women simply gave up fighting when faced with expensive legal battles they couldn't afford. When they mentioned the name of the attorney handling the class action lawsuit, I quickly wrote it down on a napkin. Sarah Rodriguez, with an office downtown, was apparently building cases against multiple lawyers who specialized in helping wealthy clients defraud their spouses during divorce proceedings. As the women left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months' hope. Maybe my situation wasn't unique. Maybe there was legal recourse for what David had done to me. Maybe other women had faced similar betrayals and found ways to fight back successfully. Marcus and Emma returned from the playground, their cheeks flushed with excitement and their earlier sadness temporarily forgotten. "Can we come here for Christmas too, Mom?" Marcus asked, sliding back into the booth. "I like it better than fancy restaurants where you have to sit still and be quiet." Looking at my children's genuine happiness in this simple setting, I realized that Gerald's rejection might actually be a blessing in disguise. These kids didn't need to learn that love was conditional on financial status or social standing. They were learning resilience, empathy, and the value of simple pleasures that money couldn't buy. But they also deserved justice. They deserved a mother who fought for their rights and refused to accept being cheated out of their financial security. As I watched them share their apple slices and laugh about their playground adventures, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow, I would call Sarah Rodriguez and find out if David's betrayal was part of a larger pattern of legal fraud that could finally be exposed and punished. Sarah Rodriguez's law office occupied the third floor of a modest downtown building, far from the gleaming corporate towers where David worked. Her waiting room featured comfortable but worn furniture, and the walls displayed certificates from various legal aid organizations rather than expensive artwork. When Sarah emerged from her office to greet me, I was struck by her genuine warmth and professional competence. A woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent dark eyes, she wore a simple navy suit that spoke of substance over style. "Tell me everything," she said, settling behind her desk with a legal pad and pen. "Don't leave out any details, even if they seem unimportant." For the next 2 hours, I recounted every aspect of my divorce, from David's initial affair to the mysterious disappearance of assets I knew had existed. Sarah listened carefully occasionally, asking clarifying questions about dates, amounts, and legal procedures. "Your case fits a pattern we've been tracking," she said finally. "David's firm has developed quite a reputation for helping wealthy clients minimize their divorce settlements through questionable means. The problem is proving it." She explained that building a case required documentation I didn't possess: bank records, property transfers, business valuations, and other financial evidence that David's team had carefully kept away from me during the divorce proceedings. "We need proof that assets were hidden or transferred specifically to defraud you during the divorce," Sarah continued. "Unfortunately, most of that evidence is in David's possession or control." My phone rang as we concluded our meeting. Gerald's name appeared on the screen, and I almost declined the call before deciding to answer. "Carlie, this morning's behavior was inappropriate," he began, but his tone suggested annoyance rather than genuine apology. "However, you need to understand that I can't have you embarrassing the family in front of important people. Dad, I brought homemade bread to a family gathering. How is that embarrassing?" "It's not just about today," he replied impatiently. "Your whole situation reflects poorly on our family's reputation. People in my business circles are starting to ask questions about why my daughter is working menial jobs and living in poverty." Before I could respond, I heard Patricia's voice in the background, and Gerald apparently handed her the phone. "Carlie, dear," Patricia said with false sweetness, "Gerald and I think it might be best if you focused on finding a suitable husband instead of playing the victim. A woman with 2 children needs a man who can provide stability. This whole independence thing isn't working out for you." The condescension in her voice was breathtaking, but what followed was even worse. "Maybe David would consider reconciliation if you showed some humility and worked on improving yourself. Men don't like women who complain constantly about their circumstances." I ended the call without responding, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. Patricia's suggestion that I should beg David to take me back after his betrayal and fraud revealed the depth of her ignorance about my situation. That evening, while helping the children with their homework, Emma made an observation that changed everything. "Mom, why did Daddy put those papers in the special box at the bank last weekend?" I looked up from Marcus's math worksheet, suddenly focused entirely on Emma's casual comment. "What papers, sweetheart?" When we went to the bank with Daddy and Stephanie, he opened a little door in the wall and put a big envelope inside. He told the bank lady it was very important and nobody else could see it. A safety deposit box. David had never mentioned having one during our marriage, and he certainly hadn't disclosed it during the divorce proceedings. If he was storing documents there, especially recently, it might contain evidence of the hidden assets Sarah needed to build our case. Marcus looked up from his homework with sudden interest. "Oh yeah, Stephanie was really nervous about it. She kept asking if anyone else had the key, and Daddy said no, just him. Then he gave me this." Marcus pulled a small key from his backpack attached to a keychain shaped like a miniature briefcase. He said it was a backup key for something special and I should keep it safe. I stared at the key in amazement. David had given my son access to evidence of his own financial fraud, probably thinking an 8-year-old would never understand its significance or mention it to me. "Did Daddy say anything else about the box or the papers?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "He and Stephanie were talking about how smart it was to move everything to Florida, where you would never think to look." Florida. David had purchased property there without disclosing it during our divorce. He was actively hiding assets in multiple states, using a safety deposit box to store documentation of his fraud. I called Sarah Rodriguez immediately, despite the late hour. "This could be exactly what we need," she said after I explained the children's revelation. "But we'll need to proceed very carefully. We can't use that key without proper legal authorization, but knowing it exists gives us grounds to request a court order for a comprehensive search of David's assets." For the first time in months, I felt like I had a real chance at justice. My children in their innocence had handed me the key to exposing their father's lies and recovering the financial security he had stolen from us. But I also realized how manipulative David had been using our children as unwitting accomplices in his fraud scheme. He had given Marcus the key, probably planning to retrieve it later, if needed, never imagining that the children would mention their bank visit to me. As I tucked the children into their beds that night, I promised myself that David's days of hiding behind legal technicalities and exploiting his own children were numbered. With Sarah's help and the evidence my children had unknowingly provided, we were going to expose everything. Over the next several weeks, Sarah worked tirelessly to build our case. She filed motions requesting comprehensive financial disclosure and obtained court orders that would allow us to examine David's assets more thoroughly. Meanwhile, I continued my double shifts at the diner and cleaning company, but now I had something my father's money could never buy: righteous purpose. During this period, social media became an unexpected source of information about David's hidden lifestyle. His fiancée Stephanie maintained an Instagram account filled with photos of their lavish activities, pictures of expensive dinners, weekend trips to luxury resorts, and shopping sprees that cost more than my monthly income, provided a stark contrast to David's claims of financial hardship. One particular post caught my attention. Stephanie had tagged their location at a beachfront property in Key West, Florida, with the caption, "Our little slice of paradise." The house in the background was a stunning 2-story contemporary home with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private dock. A quick search of Florida property records revealed that the house had been purchased 6 months ago by a company called Coastal Investments, LLC. Sarah's investigation into Coastal Investments revealed that David was the sole owner and director of this shell company, which had purchased not only the Key West property, but also a luxury condo in Miami Beach. The total value of these Florida properties exceeded $800,000 money that should have been disclosed and divided during our divorce proceedings. "He's been planning this for years," Sarah explained during one of our meetings. creating shell companies, transferring assets, establishing residency in Florida, where certain financial protections are stronger. This wasn't impulsive betrayal, it was calculated fraud. The children's weekend visits with David became sources of additional intelligence. They would return with stories about the new house with a pool and Daddy's big boat that painted a picture of wealth David had denied possessing during our legal proceedings. Marcus, with the observational skills typical of an 8-year-old, provided the most damaging evidence. Daddy showed me his office in the Florida house, he reported after one weekend visit. It has a big safe behind a picture, and he keeps lots of papers in there. He told Stephanie they moved everything important there because you would never think to look in Florida. Emma added her own innocent observations. Stephanie has so many pretty dresses now. She showed me her closet, and it's bigger than our whole bedroom. Daddy bought her a car that cost more than some people's houses. Each piece of information my children provided revealed the extent of David's deception. While claiming poverty to reduce his financial obligations to us, he was financing an extravagant lifestyle for himself and his new fiancée, using assets he had hidden from the divorce proceedings. The emotional impact of these revelations was complicated. On one hand, I felt vindicated knowing my instincts about hidden assets had been correct. On the other hand, I was furious that David was flaunting his wealth while his children wore secondhand clothes and ate generic brand cereal. But the most painful aspect was realizing how David had manipulated our children throughout the process. He had used Marcus as an unwitting courier for the safety deposit box. Key turned their visits into opportunities for intelligence gathering about my activities and exposed them to luxury they couldn't have with me while expecting them to keep secrets about his true financial situation. During one particularly difficult evening, Marcus asked a question that broke my heart. "Mom, why does Daddy have so much money for Stephanie but none to help us? Did we do something wrong?" Explaining financial fraud to an 8-year-old required careful consideration of his emotional well-being while still validating his perceptions of the unfairness he witnessed. "Sometimes adults make selfish choices that hurt other people," I told him. "Daddy is supposed to share his money fairly with our family, but he's chosen to hide it instead. That's not your fault, and it's not right." Emma, with the directness children often possess, asked an even more challenging question. "Are we going to be poor forever because Daddy is mean?" Sarah answered that question more definitively than I could have hoped just weeks earlier. "We're going to court next month with evidence that should force your father to be honest about his finances," she explained to me after filing our latest motions. "The Florida properties alone represent enough hidden assets to significantly increase your settlement and child support. But our breakthrough came from an unexpected source." During a routine review of David's credit reports, Sarah discovered that he had recently applied for a mortgage to purchase yet another property, this time a mountain cabin in Colorado. The loan application listed assets and income that were dramatically higher than what he had disclosed during our divorce. "Mortgage fraud is a federal crime," Sarah explained. "He's lied either to the mortgage company or to the divorce court, possibly both. This gives us leverage we didn't have before." More importantly, the mortgage application included financial statements that revealed the true scope of David's hidden wealth. Bank accounts in 3 states' investment portfolios worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and business interests he had never mentioned during our marriage. As we prepared for court, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety I hadn't experienced since the original divorce proceedings. But this time was different. This time, I had evidence, legal representation, and the support of other women who had faced similar betrayals. The night before our court date, Gerald called again. "I've been hearing rumors about legal action against David," he said carefully. "People in my business network are talking about investigations into his law firm. If there's going to be a scandal, I need to know how it might affect our family's reputation." His concern was still focused entirely on appearances rather than justice, but I detected something different in his tone. For the first time, he seemed to consider that maybe David hadn't been the perfect son-in-law he had always believed him to be. "Dad David has been lying to everyone, including you. Tomorrow we're going to prove it in court. There was a long pause before Gerald responded. Carlie, if what you're saying is true, if David really has been hiding money that belongs to you and the children, then I owe you an apology. It wasn't the heartfelt acknowledgement I needed, but it was a start. My father was finally beginning to question the narrative that had justified his treatment of me for the past 2 years. As I prepared for what could be the most important day of my legal battle, I reflected on how far I had come from that humiliating Thanksgiving morning just months earlier. My children had unknowingly provided the keys to exposing their father's fraud. Other women facing similar situations had shown me I wasn't alone, and I had found the strength to fight for justice despite my family's initial rejection. Tomorrow, David would finally face the consequences of his calculated betrayal, and my children would see that their mother was strong enough to stand up for their rights, even when the world seemed stacked against us. The courthouse downtown buzzed with activity as Sarah and I arrived for our hearing. David sat at the plaintiff's table with his high-powered legal team, wearing an expensive charcoal suit that probably cost more than I earned in a month. His confidence was evident in his relaxed posture and casual conversations with his attorneys. That confidence evaporated quickly once Sarah began presenting our evidence. The judge, Honorable Margaret Chen, listened carefully as Sarah outlined the systematic pattern of asset concealment that David had orchestrated over several years. Financial records, property purchases, business formations, and mortgage applications painted a clear picture of deliberate fraud designed to minimize his divorce settlement obligations. Your Honor, Sarah said, presenting bank statements and property deeds, Mr. David Mitchell has purchased real estate worth over $1.2 million since initiating divorce proceedings, using shell companies and false financial statements to conceal these acquisitions from the court and his former wife. David's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Harrison Wells, attempted to dismiss our evidence as circumstantial and irrelevant to the original divorce settlement. These business investments were made after the divorce was finalized, Wells argued. My client has no legal obligation to share post-divorce earnings with his former spouse. Judge Chen's expression grew increasingly stern as Sarah methodically demonstrated that David's post-divorce earnings were actually pre-existing assets that had been hidden during the original proceedings. Mr. Mitchell, the judge said directly to David, can you explain how you purchased a $800,000 property in Florida just 3 months after claiming in this very courtroom that your liquid assets totaled less than $50,000? David's response was a masterclass in evasion and legal doublespeak, but Judge Chen was clearly unimpressed with his explanations. The real bombshell came when Sarah presented evidence of David's mortgage application for the Colorado cabin. The financial statements he had submitted to the lending institution showed assets exceeding $2 million, while his divorce disclosures had claimed net worth of less than $300,000. This represents either mortgage fraud or perjury in divorce proceedings, Sarah told the court, possibly both. But our strongest evidence came from an unexpected source. During the investigation, Sarah had discovered that other women married to lawyers from David's firm had experienced remarkably similar patterns of asset concealment during their divorces. Patricia Morrison, the wife of David's law partner, had been told her husband was nearly bankrupt while he secretly purchased a vacation home in the Bahamas. Jennifer Walsh discovered that her ex-husband had transferred ownership of their joint business to his brother for $1 just weeks before filing for divorce. Your Honor, this appears to be a systematic practice within the law firm of Morrison, Wells and Associates, Sarah explained. Our investigation has identified at least 7 women whose husbands used similar tactics to hide assets during divorce proceedings. The implications were staggering. David wasn't just a cheating husband who had gotten greedy during our divorce. He was part of a professional network that specialized in helping wealthy men defraud their wives during marital dissolution. Judge Chen ordered an immediate freeze on all of David's assets and scheduled additional hearings to determine the full extent of his hidden wealth. More importantly, she referred our case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal prosecution. As we left the courthouse, David's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the confident swagger he had displayed throughout our original divorce proceedings. He avoided eye contact and spoke in hushed, urgent tones with his legal team. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from an unexpected source. Patricia, my stepmother, wanted to meet privately to discuss information she claimed could be relevant to our case. "I don't trust her," I told Sarah immediately. "She's been working against me from the beginning." "Sometimes people change sides when they realize they're on the losing team," Sarah replied pragmatically. "Let's hear what she has to say." We met Patricia at a coffee shop downtown far from Gerald's usual haunts. She looked nervous and uncertain, constantly checking over her shoulder as if expecting to be discovered. "I need to tell you something that I should have mentioned months ago." She began, her usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. "David has been paying me to encourage Gerald's rejection of you." The confession hit me like a physical blow, even though Jenny had suspected something similar. For the past year, David has been depositing $5,000 monthly into a separate bank account I set up. In exchange, I was supposed to convince Gerald that you were a bad influence on the grandchildren, and that maybe David should get full custody. Patricia pulled out bank statements showing regular deposits from an account registered to Coastal Investments, LLC, David's Florida Shell Company. He said it was temporary just until the divorce was finalized and you stopped causing problems. But after the court hearing today, I realized this whole thing is about to explode and I don't want to go down with him. The scope of David's manipulation was breathtaking. He had been paying my stepmother to isolate me from my family's support system, ensuring I would be too emotionally broken and financially desperate to fight his fraudulent divorce settlement effectively. "There's more," Patricia continued reluctantly. "David recorded some of our phone conversations about you and the children. He said it was for legal purposes in case he needed to prove you were an unfit mother. I have copies of those recordings." She handed Sarah a flash drive containing audio files of conversations where Patricia had made disparaging comments about my parenting and financial situation, comments that had been prompted and encouraged by David's leading questions. He was building a case for full custody while simultaneously hiding the assets that would have made such a custody battle financially impossible for me to fight, I realized aloud. The criminal conspiracy was becoming clear. David hadn't just hidden assets during our divorce. He had actively worked to undermine my family relationships and parental rights, while positioning himself to eliminate child support obligations entirely through a future custody modification. Sarah listened to portions of the recordings with growing amazement. "This is evidence of witness tampering and conspiracy to commit fraud," she told us. "Patricia, you're going to need your own attorney because you could face criminal charges as a co-conspirator." That evening, Gerald called me for the first time in months without Patricia coaching him in the background. "Carlie, I just learned about Patricia's arrangement with David," he said, his voice heavy with shame and regret. "I had no idea I was being manipulated. I thought my concerns about your situation were my own judgments, but I was being fed information designed to turn me against you." The apology I had been waiting for finally came, but it felt hollow after everything that had happened. "I failed you as a father," Gerald continued. "I let my prejudices about money and social status blind me to David's character and your strength. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." While Gerald's recognition of his mistakes was important, the real victory was the evidence we now possessed to expose David's criminal conspiracy. The man who had portrayed himself as the successful, honest professional while painting me as the failure was about to face federal fraud charges that could result in years in prison. More importantly, the other women whose husbands had used similar tactics now had evidence to reopen their own cases and seek justice for the fraud they had experienced. As I tucked my children into bed that night, Marcus asked a question that showed how much he had understood about our family's situation. "Mom, does this mean Daddy was lying when he said he didn't have money to help us?" "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy was lying about a lot of things. but now the truth is coming out and things are going to get better for us. Emma, with her characteristic directness, made an observation that perfectly captured the situation. So Daddy and Patricia were being mean to us on purpose. That's not very nice. No, it wasn't nice at all. But sometimes when people do mean things, other people work together to make sure they can't hurt anyone else. Looking at my children's faces, I realized they were learning lessons about justice, integrity, and resilience that would serve them throughout their lives. They had seen their mother fight against overwhelming odds and win through persistence and truth, rather than money and connections. The next phase of our legal battle would focus on recovering the assets David had stolen and ensuring he faced criminal consequences for his fraud. But we had already achieved something more important. We had exposed the truth and proven that justice was possible even when the system seemed designed to protect wealthy men at the expense of their families. Armed with Patricia's confession and the mounting evidence of David's criminal conspiracy, I decided it was time to confront the people who had betrayed my children and me. Sarah advised against direct confrontation, preferring to let the legal system handle everything. But I needed my father and stepmother to face the reality of what their actions had cost our family. I arrived at Gerald's house on a Saturday morning knowing Patricia would be there for their weekly breakfast routine. The manicured lawn and expensive landscaping that had once intimidated me now seemed like theatrical props designed to impress people who valued appearances over substance. Gerald answered the door wearing his usual weekend uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt, but his confident demeanor had been replaced by obvious discomfort. "Carlie, I wasn't expecting you," he said carefully. "Patricia and I were just discussing the situation with David and the legal proceedings." "I'm sure you were," I replied, stepping past him into the marble foyer. "In fact, that's exactly what I want to discuss." Patricia emerged from the kitchen carrying a coffee cup, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, even for a casual Saturday morning. When she saw me, her face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Patricia," I said calmly, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your business relationship with my ex-husband." Gerald looked confused, clearly unaware of the full scope of Patricia's betrayal, despite their previous conversations about David's legal troubles. "What business relationship?" he asked, looking between Patricia and me with growing concern. I pulled out copies of the bank statements Sarah had obtained, showing the monthly deposits from David's shell company into Patricia's secret account. For over a year, David has been paying Patricia $5,000 monthly to turn you against me and the children. I explained, handing Gerald the documents. Every negative comment she's made about my parenting, every suggestion that David should get full custody, every piece of advice about cutting me off from family support was paid for by my ex-husband. Gerald's face went through a range of emotions as he processed the information. Confusion gave way to shock, then anger, and finally a deep sadness that aged him visibly. "Patricia, is this true?" he asked quietly, staring at the bank records. Patricia's response was a masterclass in deflection and justification. "You don't understand the whole situation," she said defensively. "David was genuinely concerned about the children's welfare. Carlie was struggling financially, working multiple jobs, barely able to provide basic necessities. He thought maybe a more stable custody arrangement would be better for everyone." "By paying you to lie to my father," I interrupted. "By recording your conversations to build a false case against my parenting. By hiding millions of dollars in assets while claiming he couldn't afford adequate child support." Gerald's expression grew increasingly dark as he understood the full scope of the conspiracy. "You took money to manipulate me against my own daughter and grandchildren," he asked Patricia, his voice rising with each word. "It wasn't manipulation," Patricia insisted, but her defense was crumbling under the weight of documented evidence. "I genuinely believed it might be better for the children to live with David full-time. He could provide opportunities that Carlie couldn't afford." "With money he was hiding from the court," I pointed out. "Money that legally belonged to me and the children for their support and education. The confrontation escalated when Gerald discovered that Patricia had been planning to destroy evidence of her arrangement with David. A box of papers and files sat on the kitchen counter, apparently destined for the shredder in Gerald's home office. "What are these?" Gerald demanded, rifling through documents that included contracts, payment schedules, and detailed instructions from David about what information Patricia should gather about my activities and mental state. David wanted documentation of Carlie's work schedule, her financial struggles, any signs of depression or instability that could be used in a custody hearing. Patricia admitted reluctantly. I was supposed to report back regularly about her behavior and the children's well-being when they visited. The revelation that Patricia had been spying on me for David, documenting private family moments to be used as weapons in potential future legal proceedings, represented a level of betrayal I hadn't imagined possible. Gerald's business partner, Robert Hamilton, chose that moment to arrive unexpectedly for their planned golf game. Robert was a distinguished man in his 60s who owned several successful construction companies and had been considering Gerald for a senior partnership in a new development project. Robert entered through the unlocked front door calling Gerald's name and walked directly into our confrontation. He found Gerald holding incriminating documents while Patricia attempted to justify taking bribes to manipulate family relationships. "I'm sorry," Robert said, clearly embarrassed by the family drama he had witnessed. "I should come back another time." "Actually," Gerald said, his voice heavy with shame, "you should probably hear this since it affects the partnership we discussed." Gerald explained the situation to Robert with painful honesty, describing how Patricia had been paid to turn him against his daughter and grandchildren, how his judgment had been compromised by false information, and how his character had been called into question by association with David's criminal activities. Robert listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the timeline of events and the scope of David's fraud. Robert finally said, "The partnership we discussed was based on my assessment of your integrity and judgment. Learning that you've been manipulated into rejecting your own family by a man now facing federal fraud charges doesn't reflect well on either quality." The professional consequences Gerald had been so concerned about were finally materializing, but ironically, they resulted from his shallow values rather than my financial struggles. "However," Robert continued, looking at me with obvious respect, "your daughter's courage in fighting this legal battle and exposing this conspiracy shows the kind of character I value in business partners. Perhaps she's the family member I should be getting to know better." Patricia's final attempt at self-preservation came when she tried to destroy the remaining evidence of her arrangement with David. She lunged for the box of documents, apparently planning to claim they were personal papers unrelated to the conspiracy. Gerald stopped her, physically grabbing the box and handing it to me. "These belong to Carlie and her attorney," he said firmly. "You're not destroying evidence of your criminal activity in my house." The police arrived 30 minutes later, summoned by Sarah Rodriguez, when I called to report Patricia's attempt to destroy evidence. Patricia was arrested for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud charges that could result in significant prison time given the scope and duration of her criminal activity. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, she made one final attempt to justify her actions. "I was trying to help the family," she called out. "David promised this would all work out for the best." Gerald watched his wife's arrest with a mixture of sadness and disgust. "I married a criminal," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "I let her turn me against my own family while she was being paid to destroy our relationships." Robert Hamilton stayed after the police left, apparently fascinated by the dramatic revelations he had witnessed. "Gerald," he said carefully, "I need to reconsider our business partnership, not because of your daughter's financial situation, but because you allowed yourself to be manipulated so easily. Good judgment is essential in business relationships." Gerald's response showed genuine recognition of his failures. "You're right to question my judgment," he admitted. "I valued money and social status more than family loyalty and truth. My daughter showed more integrity working 2 jobs to support her children than I showed as a supposedly successful businessman. Looking at my father's obvious shame and regret, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. The man who had rejected his grandchildren based on their thrift store clothes was finally understanding that character couldn't be measured by bank account balances or social connections. But the damage to our relationship would take years to repair, and Patricia's criminal activity had cost Gerald his marriage, his business partnership, and his reputation in the community he had valued so highly. As I left my father's house that day carrying a box of evidence that would help convict David and Patricia of their crimes, I realized that justice sometimes requires confronting uncomfortable truths about the people we love. Gerald's transformation from enabler to ally was beginning, but it was driven by consequences rather than genuine moral awakening. The children deserve better than a grandfather who only valued them when their circumstances improved, but they also deserve to know that people could learn from their mistakes and work to become better human beings. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new 3-bedroom house, watching Marcus and Emma decorate sugar cookies for our Christmas celebration. The house wasn't a mansion, but it was ours, purchased with part of the settlement I'd received from the class action lawsuit against David's law firm. The legal proceedings had concluded with results that exceeded even Sarah's optimistic predictions. David faced federal charges for mortgage fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud multiple spouses during divorce proceedings. His law license had been permanently revoked, and he was serving a 3-year prison sentence while facing additional civil penalties that would continue for years. The class action settlement had provided significant financial compensation to all the women whose husbands had used similar tactics to hide assets during divorce proceedings. More importantly, the case had led to legislative changes that made such fraud more difficult to perpetrate and easier to prosecute. Patricia had been sentenced to 18 months in prison for her role in the conspiracy, followed by 2 years of probation and community service. Her conviction for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to commit fraud would remain on her criminal record, permanently a consequence of her decision to profit from destroying family relationships. Gerald had divorced Patricia immediately after her arrest, finally understanding that her influence on his judgment had been purchased by David's criminal enterprise. The divorce proceedings revealed that Patricia had been hiding assets of her own, including jewelry and cash she had acquired through her arrangement with David. "Mom, should we make extra cookies for Grandpa Gerald?" Emma asked carefully, placing red sprinkles on a star-shaped cookie. Gerald's redemption had been a slow, difficult process, requiring genuine acknowledgement of his failures and consistent efforts to rebuild trust with his grandchildren. He attended family therapy sessions, participated in the children's school activities, and gradually learned to value substance over appearances. "Yes, sweetheart," I replied, helping Marcus roll out another batch of dough. "Grandpa Gerald is bringing the Christmas presents he made for you." Gerald's gifts this year were handmade wooden toys he had crafted in his garage workshop, a skill he had discovered after losing his business partnership with Robert Hamilton. The financial consequences of his association with Patricia's criminal activity had forced him to downsize his lifestyle significantly, but the experience had taught him lessons about genuine versus superficial success. The doorbell rang and Marcus ran to answer it, returning with Gerald, who carried a large wrapped package and wore a genuine smile that had been absent during his years with Patricia. "Merry Christmas, Carlie," he said, embracing me with warmth that felt authentic rather than obligatory. "Thank you for letting me be part of your celebration." Gerald's transformation had been remarkable to witness. The man who had once been embarrassed by his daughter's financial struggles now took pride in her resilience and advocacy work. He bragged to his neighbors about my nonprofit organization that helped other women navigate divorce proceedings and protect themselves from financial fraud. "Tell me about your latest case," Gerald said as we settled in the living room with hot chocolate and freshly baked cookies. My nonprofit called Second Chances Legal Advocacy had helped 37 women over the past 6 months recover assets hidden by their ex-husbands during divorce proceedings. Working with Sarah Rodriguez and a network of other attorneys, we provided legal support, emotional counseling, and practical resources for women facing similar betrayals to what I had experienced. We just helped a woman in Phoenix recover over $400,000 her ex-husband had hidden in cryptocurrency accounts. I told Gerald, she's going back to school to become a nurse practitioner, something she always wanted to do but couldn't afford. Emma looked up from her cookie decorating with interest. Mom helps other mommies who have mean ex-husbands like Daddy David. That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes people try to hurt others by hiding money or telling lies, but we work together to make sure everyone gets treated fairly. Marcus, now 9 years old and increasingly perceptive about adult situations, asked a question that showed his growing understanding of justice and consequences. Mom, do you think Daddy David learned his lesson in prison? Will he be nicer when he gets out? The question required careful consideration of both honesty and age-appropriate explanation. People can change if they want to, I told him. But your father will need to prove through his actions that he's learned from his mistakes. Until then, we focus on taking care of our own family and helping other families who need support. Gerald's presence at our Christmas celebration represented more than just family reconciliation. He had become an active supporter of my advocacy work, using his business connections to help other women find employment and housing after difficult divorces. His home workshop had become a training center where women learned practical skills like basic carpentry and home maintenance that could help them achieve independence. I never realized how many women face these same problems, Gerald said, sipping his hot chocolate. Last week, I helped a single mother install new locks and security lighting at her apartment. Her ex-husband had been using his key to enter without permission and intimidate her. The children's relationship with their grandfather had evolved into something much healthier than the superficial connection they'd had when Gerald valued them primarily as reflections of their father's success. Now he engaged with their interests, supported their achievements regardless of their modest circumstances, and taught them practical skills that would serve them throughout their lives. Grandpa Gerald is teaching me how to build a birdhouse for our backyard, Marcus announced proudly. We're going to paint it blue and yellow so the birds will think it's cheerful. Emma added her own excitement about her grandfather's involvement in their lives. He's going to help me plant a vegetable garden this spring. We're going to grow tomatoes and carrots and maybe some flowers too. As we cleaned up after our cookie decorating session, Gerald pulled me aside for a private conversation. Carlie, I know I can't undo the damage I caused by rejecting you and the children when you needed support most, he said seriously. But I want you to know that watching you fight for justice and build a new life has taught me more about real success than all my years in business. The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful we'd ever had. Gerald acknowledged that his values had been shaped by superficial measures of worth that had blinded him to the character qualities that actually mattered. Wealth, social status, and professional achievements meant nothing if they came at the expense of integrity, family loyalty, and compassion for others. You showed more strength working 2 jobs to support your children than David ever showed earning millions through fraud, Gerald continued. You displayed more dignity facing financial hardship with honesty than Patricia ever showed, living in luxury, bought with betrayal. As the evening wound down and Gerald prepared to leave, the children presented him with a handmade card they had created together. The front featured their drawings of our family, including Gerald with the message, "Thank you for learning how to be a good grandpa." After Gerald left, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The rejection I had experienced at that devastating Thanksgiving brunch had ultimately led to discoveries that changed not only my life, but the lives of dozens of other women facing similar betrayals. David's calculated cruelty had backfired spectacularly. His attempt to isolate me from family support had strengthened my determination to fight for justice. His financial fraud had been exposed and punished. His manipulation of our children had taught them to value honesty over wealth and resilience over comfort. Patricia's scheme to eliminate me from Gerald's inheritance had resulted in her own criminal conviction and divorce. Her efforts to poison family relationships against me had ultimately revealed her own character flaws and led to her complete rejection by the family she had tried to manipulate. Gerald's transformation from enabler to ally had been genuine, but it had required losing his marriage, his business partnership, and his social status before he could recognize the difference between superficial success and authentic achievement. As I tucked Marcus and Emma into their beds that night, they asked me to tell them again about how our family had become stronger after facing difficult challenges. Sometimes bad things happen that seem unfair and scary, I told them. But if we stay honest and work hard and help each other, we can overcome those challenges and even help other people who face similar problems. Emma, with her characteristic insight, made an observation that perfectly captured the lesson our family had learned. So when mean people try to hurt us, we can choose to become stronger and help other people instead of becoming mean too. Exactly, sweetheart. That's how we make sure that bad things lead to good results instead of more bad things. Marcus added his own understanding of the situation. And we learned that money doesn't make people good or bad. Good people are good even when they don't have much money, and bad people are bad even when they have lots of money. Looking at my children's faces, I realized they had learned lessons about justice, integrity, and resilience that would serve them throughout their lives. They had seen their mother fight against overwhelming odds and win through persistence and truth rather than money and connections. They had witnessed their grandfather transform from prejudice to acceptance through genuine recognition of his mistakes. Most importantly, they had learned that being rejected by people who valued wealth over character was actually a blessing in disguise. The people who abandoned us during our lowest moments had revealed their true nature, while the people who supported us had proven their genuine worth. Before I turned off their bedroom lights, I asked my children a question that would become a family tradition. What did you learn today that made you stronger or wiser? Marcus thought carefully before answering. I learned that helping other people who have problems like we had makes me feel proud of our family. Emma's response was equally thoughtful. I learned that Grandpa Gerald can change from being mean to being nice if he really wants to, so maybe other people can change too. Their answers reminded me that our family's journey through betrayal, financial fraud, and family rejection had ultimately led to growth purpose and genuine happiness that couldn't be purchased with hidden assets or stolen through conspiracy. As I settled into my own bed that night, I reflected on a truth that had taken years of hardship to understand. Sometimes the people who abandon you during your darkest moments are actually doing you a favor by revealing their true character. Real family, genuine success, and lasting happiness are built on integrity, resilience, and authentic love, rather than financial status or social appearances. The rejection that had seemed so devastating at that Thanksgiving brunch had actually freed me to discover my own strength and find people who valued my true worth rather than my economic circumstances. Our story had become one of triumph over betrayal, justice over fraud, and authentic success over superficial appearances. Most importantly, it had become a source of hope and practical assistance for other women facing similar betrayals, proving that even the most calculated cruelties could be transformed into forces for positive change. I want to ask you something that's been on my mind since sharing this story. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's rejection of you during a difficult time actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise? Sometimes the people who abandon us reveal more about their own character than ours, and their rejection frees us to find our real strength and purpose. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you or might help someone you know who's facing similar challenges, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others. Your support helps us reach women who need to know they're not alone in fighting for justice and dignity. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of truth to overcome even the most calculated betrayals. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to recognize your own worth regardless of who fails to see it.